Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Friday, September 6th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about, well, some pretty awesome set visit stuff, and I'm going to be playing my interview with It Chapter 2 director Andy Muschietti. Joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film managing editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
And my name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com. So, Jacob, let's get right into it, man. You were on the set of Dr. Sleep, which is Mike Flanagan's sequel to Stephen King's The Shining, but kind of also Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Let's get into this thing. What is this movie?
Okay, this is based on the 2013 novel Dr. Sleep by Stephen King, so it's not some cheap cash-in sequel to The Shining. It is written by Stephen King, as the novel was. But as many Stephen King fans know and will tell you, the original novel of The Shining, published in 1977, is very different from Kubrick's movie, which was made in 1980. And the differences are both thematic, in that Kubrick's film is very hopeless and very dark and nihilistic, whereas King's novel is actually fairly hopeful, and Jack Torrance redeems himself before he dies, as opposed to freezing to death hunting down his son. But a big diversion is that Overlook Hotel is still standing at the end of Kubrick's film. The haunted hotel is still around to haunt more, whereas at the end of the book, it burns down, thanks to Jack Torrance deciding, enough is enough and fighting against the forces that are, trying to destroy him. So you have two very conflicting endings, two very different thematic points of view, and you have two of the greatest horror stories of all time, both The Shining and The Shining. So when we first walked onto the set of Dr. Sleep, one of the first questions anybody asked, Mike Flanagan, the director, you know him from The Haunting of Hill House and Netflix, Hush, Gerald's Game. Really strong director. In my money, he's one of the best in the horror genre right now. We asked him, is this a sequel to Kubrick's Shining or a sequel to Stephen King's The Shining? And Flanagan was pretty upfront about it. This is a sequel to both. This is a sequel that adapts the actual text of Dr. Sleep for the most part. Follows a grown-up Dan Torrance, now played by Ewan McGregor, who survived the events of the Overlook Hotel and has spent the past 40 years drinking himself into a stupor and following his father's alcoholic path because, he has the shine. He and his drinking helps him keep it under control, so he can't see visions of horrible things happening all around him. And the novel slowly, follows him as he adjusts to life and cleans up and dries out and uses his powers for good. But naturally, all kinds of supernatural shenanigans start happening, and he has to rescue another girl who has the ability to shine from a group of people who turn themselves immortal by draining the life energy of people who can shine. So it's this really strange story between Danny helping another kid survive a supernatural threat of her own, who also has his abilities. So that is Dr. Sleep in a nutshell. So the question is, okay, Ben, what is Dr. Sleep? Dr. Sleep at this point is going to be a sequel to both the novel and Kubrick's film, because Mike Flanagan literally said that there's no way they were going to make a Shining sequel on the big screen and not Return to the Overlook Hotel. So even though Stephen King has famously not liked Kubrick's film and has famously and publicly talked about how much it got wrong and how it goes against what he was intending in his book, Flanagan worked up the nerve to write a screenplay, email Stephen King and say, do I have your blessing to incorporate the imagery and tone of the Kubrick film, to which King obliged and said yes. So if you've only ever seen The Shining, the movie, this will function as a sequel to that. If you only ever read the book, this will also function as that somehow, even though the Overlook Hotel is still around, which we'll get to in a second. So that's all just the nitty-gritty of adapting something that has so much cultural baggage. This is The Shining we're talking about.
Yeah. So I want to know, Jacob, a lot of times on set visits, the studio will design it in such a way where the visiting journalists to the set will be able to see something kind of cool happening, like theoretically. It's often very, very controlled, like you talked about during the Creep Show set visit recently on the podcast. But sometimes, they make an effort to let you see something cool. Like when I was on the set for, I think it was Ant-Man and the Wasp, I got to see like the quantum tunnel that was built, and that was pretty cool. And then I was on the set for the Carrie remake, and you got to see the part where the blood came down on Chloe Grace Moretz or whatever. So like they take you to these sets at specific times and when certain things are still constructed to show you some cool things that they've built. But your experience sounds way beyond just like seeing something cool. You actually got to walk around in the recreation of the Overlook Hotel, right?
Yes, this was insane. we first started off watching them film another scene, a scene with Abra, the girl, the little girl who can shine, and it's a pretty low key scene of her being put to bed and talking to her parents. And then Mike Flanagan would come by between takes and chat with us, and we knew something was up because we were sitting. We slowly realized that our interviews were taking place in room 237, the haunted room from the original movie, and not Stephen King's haunted room, because the room there's a different number in the book. But this is the room 237 with the green walls and the bathtub and all the ickiness. And so we already knew something was up.
So first of all, just doing all of your like roundtable style interviews in that room would be cool enough, on its own, right? Like, because it's a pretty spot on recreation of that iconic room from the original The Shining.
Yeah, there were even like tables full of screen caps from the original movie and images and like designs. They clearly laid it all out for us to see it, but they took every detail they could. And then when there was an extended break, Mike Flanagan, very giddily, like smiling the whole time, wanted to show us something. So he led the group out of the soundstage and across the way to another soundstage. He's like looking back at us, laughing the entire time. And he made it very clear that he wanted to watch us see it for the first time. So he opens the door to another soundstage, and there is the Colorado Lounge from the Overlook Hotel. If you remember, this is the big set from The Shining, the one where Jack Torrance is typing, and the one where Wendy confronts him with the baseball bat, the one where you see where Danny drives by on his big wheel, and the camera tracks him with all his long tracking shots. And this isn't just a recreation. They went to the Warner Bros. Archives, dug up Kubrick's old blueprints for the original set, and had it built to the nail, to how it was built in 1980 for the original film. And it's one massive set. Like, it's the Colorado Lounge itself, followed by the stairs that go up to a second level, and the level wraps around the entire set with various hotel room doors and balconies. And at one point, we even went out one fake door. We opened it, it looked like a hotel room door, but you open it, and suddenly you're looking out at the other back half of the soundstage, where the front of the Overlook had been built with the big snowy front and all the big windows and everything. So they built it all. And we went on a half-hour tour with Mike Flanagan as he walked us through the Overlook Hotel from room to room, up the stairs, putting out props, talking about how they went through the movie and took thousands of screenshots of all the frames because they were trying to find, what is that book on the shelf? What is this a picture of on the wall? And they couldn't find the exact thing. They recreated it. The carpet, the tacky furniture, the color scheme, it's all there. And interestingly, it looks a little worse for wear in some areas. Same with room 237, as if it's been abandoned for a long time. So they wouldn't comment entirely about how the Overlook fits into the movie. They did tell us that the climax of the film, the third act, is set at the Overlook now, which is very different from the book, because the book doesn't have the Overlook. So whatever final showdown happens is going to be here instead. So since another set we saw was the Torrance's room with red rum written on the door and the door still broken open from the axe in the original movie.
Wow.
We're either seeing a hotel that was closed up and abandoned right after all these murders happened and nobody reopened it, or we're seeing, a nightmare version of it where like the worst of it, the worst time in Danny's life is being brought back to torment him in some kind of psychic vision.
Yeah,
I don't know which one it is.
What do you think? What do you think is more likely? Like, do you think you're going to get, something like flashbacks? Because it sounds like you're saying that, some parts are look, well kept, and then other parts are dilapidated or whatever. Like, do you think there's maybe a mixture of both? Like, how do you think that they're going to handle that?
My guess is a mixture of both. I wouldn't be surprised if, the entire hotel is dilapidated in one moment, and like clean and spry the next time. And I'm very excited to see what they do, because there were some sets like the hallway where Danny first sees the ghost twins in the original movie. Like, that one was like literally falling apart. Like, there was like mold in the walls, and the carpets were torn up, and the wallpaper was peeling. Whereas the Colorado Lounge looked old, but not necessarily like it was falling into total disrepair. So I'm very curious to see how they utilize these sets. And as Flanagan told us in the interview, which you can read on the site, the idea of making a Shining sequel and not going back here was like unfathomable to him, and he would not have made the movie if King had not gave his blessing to incorporate the Kubrick stuff. So it is by far the coolest film set I've ever been on.
So last year, movie fans had a chance to revisit the Overlook in Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One, but that was like a digital recreation. And this is a literal, like you were saying, like nail by nail, plank by plank, like every tiny book in the background sort of recreation for somebody like you who's been, a movie fan for your entire life and loves horror and loves Stephen King and loves The Shining. Like, this must have been like a life-changing experience for you.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it sounds really cheesy, but like I was there with other people. Like I was there with nerdist Lindsay Romaine, who used to write for Slash Film, and we're looking at sort of like jaw gape, like, are we actually here? Are we actually seeing this? And like it's been almost a year since his visit, and I still can't believe it. One thing I read about in this article is that they were a couple days away from striking the set when we were there, which means they're going to disassemble the set, and they'd never said they were going to destroy or tear it down. And it was even suggested to us that it may be saved for some purpose. And knowing that Warner Brothers has their horror made here event now, their annual celebration of horror films, where you have scare actors and haunted mazes.
Oh, that's on the Warner Brothers studio backlot, right?
Yeah. And if they get some space, rebuild the Shining set with these pieces there, and it's charged admission to come walk around it on Halloween, it's going to be a thing people travel from all around the world to see, and it would be worth it.
Oh man, that would be awesome. So, wow, yeah. I mean, just like the I can picture like your face as you turn the corner and see the hole in the bathroom door that Nicholson put his face through. Like, that must have been just wild.
Yeah, and it is wild. And my concern is that when I'm saying, it sounds like this movie's going to be a big nostalgia fest. Like, hey, remember the Overlook? Here it is. But Flanagan is such a talented filmmaker, and he's so in line with Stephen King's sensibilities. I mean, Kubrick and King don't see the world in the same way. Kubrick didn't have faith in humanity, whereas Stephen King actually does. And Flanagan's horror is like King's in that way, in that in the end, good people win most of the time in Stephen King stories, and humanity moves on, and people help each other. And The Shining, as a book, came to that conclusion as too, but Kubrick's movie comes to the opposite conclusion. So I feel like by being a sequel to Kubrick's movie, Flanagan is in a position to restore King's message of if The Shining is about a family being torn apart and people being torn down, Dr. Sleep is a book and possibly a movie about people being built back up and coming together and like learning from their strengths. And I feel like as a sequel and a reaction to the original movie, it could actually serve Stephen King in a way that maybe no Stephen King movie ever has before.
Yeah, that's interesting. So before we get to another Stephen King property, I want to give you an opportunity, Jacob. Is there any one piece of information that you learned on this set visit that you haven't mentioned it yet that you think people would be interested to know about this movie?
This is a minor thing, but something I really appreciated, which was somebody asked Ewan McGregor, who's playing, grown-up Dan Torrance, if he looked at the child actor from the original movie to learn like mannerisms or like the way he acts, and which Ewan McGregor said no, because when you're a 5-year-old kid, you don't actually grow up to be a 5-year-old kid. You grow up to be more like your parents. So he's not doing a Jack Nicholson impression, but he watched Jack Nicholson's Jack Torrance closely, so he could play that character's son as opposed to playing that kid. I thought that was a really, really cool acting observation.
Yeah, for sure. And McGregor is like one of those guys that I feel like has been largely underutilized or maybe underappreciated. It's like how I feel like Ethan Hawke has gotten like he's finally started to get his due over the past few years as a performer, like somebody who's been in a lot of stuff and has been mostly really good in a lot of things, even if all of the movies that he's been in haven't been great. I feel like Ewan McGregor is sort of in that same camp. Like it's very rare to see him give a bad performance. So I'm excited to see what he does on such a huge stage with so much pressure and like expectation of something like Dr. Sleep on his shoulders. So
between this and It Chapter 2 and James McAvoy, it's the age of a hot Scotsman playing Stephen King protagonists.
Well, that's a good transition into my conversation with Andy Muschietti, who directed It Chapter 2. He directed It Chapter 1 as well. And in this interview, I talked to him about how he distinguished between moments of this movie that needed to be adapted directly and the aspects where he felt like he could put a little bit more of his personal stamp on this film. Hey listeners, this is Ben. I just wanted to jump in really quickly to say that this interview does contain spoilers, so if you have not seen It Chapter 2 yet, I would recommend just waiting until you get a chance to check that out. The movie's in theaters right now, and then come back and listen to this interview. But it's a good chat. It's about 15 minutes, so here is my discussion with director Andy Muschietti.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, Andy, how's it going?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm great. Congratulations on the movie.
much. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I really did. I'm a huge fan of the book, and I know that you're a big fan of the book as well. So my first question actually is, how do you distinguish between moments of this movie that need to be adapted directly and areas where you sort of have the freedom to put your own touches on it?
Well, it's about, like, I sort of identifying what makes a good film experience or not, because it's basically adapting to a different language. So we took the pieces of the story that actually can be translated, and and there's a space, for new events that actually basically turn the screws of tension a little more and make all the events more consequential. So there was a big space for creating those events. It's like when you read the book, it's like all that section happens in a longer time.
Right.
It's interrupted. It's not necessarily consequential, even though that there's a clear goal. But it's also interrupted by flashbacks that last for chapters, interludes of Mike. So when you translate it to a film experience, you have to basically make everything consequential, make those adjustments so it's an escalation, and crank up the tension. And that's the criteria, basically,
Yeah, for sure. And the creature designs specifically sort of seem to be an area where you can crank up some of that tension and inject some of your own, like, personal twisted imagery to it. So, like, for those aspects, are you trying to capture or create imagery that disturbs you personally, or how do you go about that part of it?
You couldn't say it better. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it all comes from the inside, It's like, I have to, like, design creatures that would scare me if I saw them for the first time.
Yeah, I think that the bug with the baby's head in the Jade of the Orient sequence is going to mess up some kids who see this movie a few years earlier than they should,
I know, and the baby bug is not something that you see in the book. It's like a weird hybrid of imagination that is pretty cool and disturbing, because it's a horrible blend.
Yeah.
It taps a little bit to the fact that nobody had babies, so it's something that it's wedged in there. It's like it's a theme. Nobody of them had babies. Why? Because they had to stay children to access the power of belief. So I sort of tossed the baby face on the bug, and it's like so disturbing. It doesn't really need an explanation, because what Pennywise is trying to do there is generate chaos and fear.
Yeah. So
I get the eyeball that I really liked from the book, but then there's a bat wing that doesn't need further explanation because it's fucking creepy, and then the floating heads of the kids that are still singing, the Chinese restaurant tune. It's chaos more than anything.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me about the scene with Bill having his vision, like seeing the origins of it. That stuff is pretty wild in the novel. So how did you go about creating that scene visually?
Well, I was, one of the events in the original book is this psycho trip. This is psychoactive trip that the kids have when they do the smokehouse. But there wasn't really a place in the first movie to put it. Starting with the fact that, the first movie we had budget limitations and, wanted to make a contained movie, and that didn't, so I wanted to put the smokehouse in the first one. I couldn't do it, but because it's an event that I really like, and I think people really remember that thing where there's actually a vision of it coming to Earth for the first time millions of years ago in the shape of an asteroid, crashing Earth. So we managed to find a place for that, and the whole ritual of Chud was, the function of it was giving Mike something to lie about, because Mike ultimately wants to use the only weapon that the Losers Club have, which is the power of belief. These characters are not children anymore, so they don't have that.
Right.
They don't have the imagination or the innocence to believe in things that don't exist. So he lies to them, right?
Yeah.
So he invokes basically this thing that is mythological, that apparently worked before in the past, but it's bullshit. It's something that actually never worked. But it doesn't matter, because if you believe, it will work. And the piece of, the information that Mike has from the first movies, I don't know, many people don't remember this, but when they're confronting Pennywise and Bill is holding this stun bolt gun that is unloaded, and all the kids think that there's a load there, and the only one who knows it doesn't is Mike.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, it's unloaded, and all the kids are like, kill it. And when Bill fires, they draw a big hole on Pennywise's face. And that was an indication for Mike that the power of unified belief is a weapon. And he, after years and years of doing research, he comes to a dead end where he notices that there's nothing that can kill Pennywise except for the element, which is belief.
Yeah.
I mean, Pennywise uses that as a weapon because he makes kids believe,
Yeah.
And but the truth is it's a weapon that can be turned against him.
Mm-hmm. The Adrian Mellon sequence is one of the most vicious things in the entire movie, and while a lot of the film's violence is really heightened, the violence inflicted on him is really, sadly, something that still happens very regularly in real life, and I've heard you say that that's why it was important to include, but I was just wondering if you were ever concerned with the idea of portraying that realistic type of violence.
No, I think it had to be realistic to show, the brutality of it is something that comes from human perversion, from human cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to hold back on that.
Yeah.
Even like Stephen King, when he included this in his story, is because it happened in his town.
Right.
It was like the murder of Charlie Howard in 1984. He was already making a story about the cruelty of humans in a small American town, and it was very important for him. Now, it was very important for me also. And I think it's relevant to a time where these things are still happening.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that was so present throughout the novel and the first movie is how the town of Derry has the sickness, almost like an infection because of its presence. But aside from the Adrian sequence, that element of the story doesn't really come into play very much in Chapter 2. So were there additional scenes that you shot that sort of continued that thread for this movie?
Of adults being evil.
Yeah, and the town itself, that kind of thing.
Well, there was, it's established in the first one. I had a movie that was 4 hours, my first cut. So I had to basically lift some things that were secondary to the main plot. I think people that have the first movie fresh, they already have a feeling of how adults are. In fact, in the second movie, you can still feel, you go back to a flashback with Beverly, where we see his dad and his twisted way in which he abuses her.
Right.
We learn a little more about it. We know where that comes from.
Yeah,
by spraying perfume on her. It's sort of trying to recreate his dead, wife.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, whatever.
And you mentioned that your first cut was 4 hours, and I was just wondering if that was an assembly cut, or was that something that actually you would have been happy with audiences watching?
No, not at all. It was that was an editorial cut, which is the thing that you see when you finish shooting, basically. Mm-hmm. So as you're shooting, your editor is sort of assembling the movie with all the things that you shot, basically, all the scenes unaltered, basically, and that was 4 hours. After that, I started my director's cut, which was a 3 hour 25. It was tighter, and the scenes the way I wanted them. And But then, of course, 325, even though we did a test screening with that version that threw a surprisingly high score, which is 82, I definitely attribute to the audience's love for the first one.
Yeah.
But there were chances to, there was opportunities there to make it trim it, into refine it,
Mm-hmm.
to a better film experience for the audience.
Yeah, and I know.
That's what we did.
Yeah, I really like the movie a lot. I think there have been a lot of stories about a potential supercut, and I don't want to get into that too much with you because you're probably sick of talking about it. But and I know that it hasn't even been confirmed yet. But could you tell me, if something like that were to happen, about some of the new material that you would want to include if that ends up coming to pass?
Yeah, well, I can't talk about this because I want to keep it on the wraps a little bit. But one of them is something from the book, and the other one is a thing that is new.
Okay.
And it is related to a resolution to the perpetrators of Adrian Mellon's beating.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering about that. Okay, cool.
Bringing some justice, to
yeah, definitely. If you had your way, would that version, that supercut version, be something that people would watch in a theater, or would that be designed specifically for like a home video release?
It feels more like a home video release,
mm-hmm.
something that because people, they won't sit in a cinema for more than 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But they would binge. On the other hand, they would binge like series in their home for like hours.
Right.
And I really don't know what format it will have on home video, whether it's like divided in like 6 episodes or what.
Yeah.
It's the same. At the end, it's the same because people that want to keep going, they will keep going.
Yeah.
But it's definitely without shooting another movie is like a sort of a definitive global vision of the whole story.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to include a couple of scenes that are not shot. Sort of like what Spielberg did on not that it was 2 parts, but the special edition of Close Encounters. They released it and then he shot more and they re-released it, and people poured to the cinema to see what those extra footage was.
Yeah. I want to ask you about It Chapter 2 specifically. Was there an element, or what is the element that you're the most proud of when you look back on the making of that movie?
I think it's apart from the new spectacle that Chapter 2 brings compared to the first one, which is scopier and a bigger scale and a bigger canvas. I'm proud of the emotional journey. I'm proud of the emotional conclusion to this story, and this is the thing. Probably because it's the thing that still gets me when I see the movie after watching it like 200 times. Mm-hmm. I still see it, and the thing that gets me is like scenes like Richie holding Eddie in the cavern, the guys in the quarry, in the water at the end, holding each other as a group. These bits still get me, and I think they work because it was well built throughout the 2 movies. I think there was an emotional engagement that was achieved, and just I see it in people. I see people like coming out of the theater with like teary eyes and stuff, and that's the greatest reward.
Yeah. I think I probably have time for one more quick question, and that is there was a report earlier this summer that you were in talks to direct The Flash, and I don't even want to get into the specifics of that with you, but I just want to ask, hypothetically speaking, what would you like to see in a Flash movie?
Well, I would be revealing too much, maybe. I can't talk about it yet because we're still like in beginning phase of that, but It's very exciting.
Okay.
That I can tell.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Andy. I appreciate it, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Wow, what a great interview. We definitely listened to that in real time.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for laying out exactly how we do it here on Slash Film Daily. But I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode and to the end of this week's episodes of Slash Film Daily. Jacob, where can people find more of your work online?
Slashfilm.com every single day, on Twitter where I'm at Jacob S. Hall.
And you can find me at slashfilm.com as well. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pearson, and you can find more about the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes. I would highly recommend reading a lot of Jacob's Dr. Sleep stuff. It's really, really good. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Podcast, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air, and don't forget to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. That helps us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show, spread the word any way you can. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you on Monday.